Space Engineers 2 Vertical Slice 2 has been released, and in this update they've added many requested features such as mechanical blocks, the basics of weapons and economy, new astronomical features like planetary rings and moons, and so much more. So let's check out everything that's been added in this update, and stick around as later in the video I will announce a giveaway where you can win a copy of Space Engineers 2. So let's start with a feature that I know lots of people are excited for, pistons and rotors. As you can see, there are two variants of each, a small piston and a large piston, and a small rotor and a large rotor. Obviously with the unified grid system of Space Engineers 2, you can place these all on the same grid anyway, so you can use the small or large versions depending on what you need. Now, as with many features that we're going to discuss in this video, these aren't necessarily the complete final versions of them, as the pistons and rotors are missing a couple of features from Space Engineers 1. For example, if you go to the control panel of the rotor, you can see that it's missing an option for minimum and maximum rotation, whereas the piston does have a minimum and maximum distance on it. And this might sort of explain why we don't have the hinge in this update as well, as that's something they'll be working on later. And we know that more features are coming to the pistons and rotors as well, as we've been told that a heavily requested community feature, subgrid welding, will be coming in Space Engineers 2 as well. It's just not in the game at the moment. However, there is an interesting new feature to the pistons and rotors. If I come to a cockpit, you can see on my toolbar that I have the rotor and the piston. So if I press 1 to select the rotor and then click my mouse, you can see that it's rotating to the left. And if I right click my mouse, it is now rotating to the right. So you can now manually control pistons and rotors from the toolbar. And if I press 2 to select the piston and then click, you can see that both pistons extend. And then if I right click, they both retract. And it's worth noting that if you want to edit your toolbar, if you press K and go to the control panel of your ship, specifically select your control seat or your cockpit, and then you have this edit button over here for edit toolbar actions. I could not find this for ages when I first got this update. Click edit toolbar actions, and then you can see you've got your list of things on the grid over here. So if I select my piston, for example, and drag it onto my toolbar onto 5, I can set all of the different options for it. So if I just select control, which is the current feature we were using a second ago, press save. And if I select 5, you can see that it still moves both pistons, but I think this is a limitation of the control command. So if I go back to my toolbar, press edit, go back to my large piston, and then just select number 7, and then put reverse piston on it. And then on 8, set piston velocity to 5. You can see that if I go to 8, it rapidly extends my piston to its maximum length, and if I press 7, it reverses the velocity of just that piston. As mentioned earlier, this update adds the beginning of weapons to the game, starting with two block weapons, the Gatling turret and the Gatling cannon. And the Gatling turret looks oh so good, oh so much better than its Space Engineers 1 counterparts. And the Gatling cannon, the static variant, looks very fine as well. Both the Gatling cannon and the Gatling turret have an 800 meter range, much like their Space Engineers 1 counterparts, and they do a moderate amount of damage to grids and perfectly demonstrate the new destruction system in Space Engineers 2. Previously we only had the debug gun, which just did a comically high amount of damage and instantly destroyed lots of blocks, but the new Gatling turret and cannon do a normal amount of damage, which means you can finally see all the fractures of the blocks coming off, with the blocks still being functional but bits of them flying off. It just looks so good. Now, it appears currently you cannot manually control the Gatling turret, or at least I cannot find a way to do it, but I'm sure that is a feature that will be coming in the future. Alongside the new Gatling turret is the new Iron Sights rifle, which I'm sure is the beginning of a suite of personal weapons that will be coming to Space Engineers 2. And unlike the Gatling turret and cannon, the rifle only has a 400 meter range, which to be fair isn't as important as it's a personal weapon, and it does much less damage to grids than those weapons as well. But I would imagine that this rifle is probably going to be used for fighting NPCs in the future, as opposed to shooting down ships and stuff. I know a lot of gun enthusiasts have like very strong opinions on how guns look, but I really do like how this weapon looks, even if it technically doesn't make sense or isn't realistic. It reminds me of the weapons in like Black Ops 2 and 3, like these weird like off-brand future guns that we would never actually use, and the sounds it makes to reload and shoot, oh, they're just so good. For a weapon more capable of shooting down ships, we have the rocket launcher, which as you can imagine, fires rockets. And this does a lot more damage than the rifle and Gatling weapons. But currently there is only the handheld version, there is no turret, so you're limited to only using it yourself. And due to the jetpack changes in Space Engineers 2, you'll probably find this very difficult to use against other ships. Against players it will definitely be very effective, but I would challenge you to hit a ship moving at 300 meters per second with this thing. I will say that I think the cost of the rocket might be too low at the moment, but as we'll be discussing changes to the production system later, I'm sure that this will all change as the game continues to update. Like I said, this is the beginning of weapons in combat in Space Engineers 2. I would expect a rocket turret and an interior turret on an imminent future, as we've seen concept art for the interior turret, and we have rockets in the game, so it's only a matter of time for rocket turrets. And previously there was a long developer post talking about changes they wanted to implement to combat in Space Engineers 2, so this is clearly something on the developer's mind and will continue to change as the game continues through early access. Whilst the welder and grinder blocks were previously in the game, they did not have functionality, and this update has added the functionality to them, with the welders obviously being able to weld up blocks, and the grinders obviously being able to grind down blocks. There's already a fantastic video by the SWAC showing how brilliant the new welders look, and I will never be able to do more justice than that video does at showing them off, so check out his video if you want to see how beautiful the welders are in Space Engineers 2. However, on top of block welders, there is also a new tool called the area welder, which is a new tool for players which quite obviously allows you to weld in an area. As you can see, if I hover over this block here, you can see it says completed blocks and then the number that are completed and not completed. And then if I click, you can see it welds up the blocks in front of me and then the number of blocks completed matches the total. Now, it doesn't do a particularly large area. You can see if I point it at large blocks, it only can do 4 at a time. The area welder tool is more designed in mind with the 25cm blocks. And as we can build blocks that are so tiny, it's very difficult to actually weld up the blocks. And additionally, with projection building, we're able to blueprint out a ship using projections, but you can't actually weld up projections behind other blocks. And as the area welder welds in an area, it's able to weld those blocks behind, allowing you to weld up these projections without requiring you to use a ship welder early on. I don't envision the area welder being a replacement for the ship welder. Obviously, ship welders already welded an area. I imagine this just exists to help you weld up really small blocks without requiring you to use a big ship welder everywhere. And it's also worth noting that this is the area welder Mark 1, so I assume in the future there'll be more area welders as well, potentially allowing you to weld up a bigger area, or potentially just being faster like the current tiered hand welders are. And speaking of things with potential, we're getting very close to 75,000 subscribers, and there's potential for a very special video if we hit that milestone. So don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel if you'd like to see that. The Vertical Slice 2.2 update also adds additional things for you to discover in the Almager star system, starting with Verger's new moon, Palatine, which looks very similar to our real life moon. And when you get down to the surface, it looks absolutely amazing. They released teasers for this a couple of weeks ago of a lunar lander landing on the surface of Palatine and then an engineer getting out and walking around. It just looks so cinematic. As you would expect, Palatine is a mostly barren moon, just having this grey moon rock everywhere, and the surface of it is covered in lots of different sized craters, and potentially, in some of these craters, there might be a secret to discover, a cave perhaps, that delves deep into the bowels of the moon itself. What is in this cave? I'll leave that for you to find out. Alongside Verger getting a new moon, Chemic, the Mars-like planet, also has one as well. This one is called Caligo, and whereas Palatine is very much like our own moon, Caligo is very different. The surface of Caligo is very volcanic with lots of black rock everywhere, and the visibility of the planet is very limited by the thick orange clouds that cover the entire moon. And these thick clouds add a very cinematic effect landing on Caligo, as at some parts the clouds are really thick, and you're never quite sure how close to the ground you are until potentially it's too late. And like Palatine, I'm sure there are lots of mysteries to discover on Caligo as well. You may have spotted it already, and additionally I did a teaser video on them last week, but Verger and Chemic have both received planetary rings around them, and these rings aren't just cosmetic. If you come closer to the rings, you can see that these rings are filled with a dense cluster of asteroids. Verger's ring is called the Viridian Halo, and the asteroids in this ring are very dense in materials, and Chemic's ring is called the Cryon Ring, and as the word Cryon would suggest, the ring is very dense in ice asteroids, allowing you to gain ice in an area that traditionally doesn't have it. On top of asteroid rings, there are also asteroid clusters. One of them is right next to Chemic and is called the Chemic Ferrum Reach. And as the word ferrum would suggest, this one is highly dense in iron specifically. And these asteroid clusters fit into 3 categories: ferric and ferrum fields, which contain large amounts of iron, ice fields, which obviously contain a large amount of ice, and radium drifts, which have a higher chance of containing uranium, platinum, and titanium, the 3 current endgame ores of Space Engineers 2. Now, it's worth noting that currently these do not appear on the map. As you can see, if I go to Chemic, there is no ring around it. And additionally, the Chemic Ferrum Reach, whilst it's shown on my discovered objects list, does not appear on the map. And that's because, as we all know, Space Engineers 2 is still in early access, and the visualization of asteroid rings and the clusters will come in the future. In the Vertical Slice 2.2 update, they haven't just added things to space though, as they have additionally added weather and planetary events to planets. Currently, weather is only visual. However, developers have said that in the future they plan to add wind to these weather events that will actually blow around your ships, but currently that is not in the game. And currently there are 2 different types of weather. Rain, which only spawns on Verger in more temperate biomes. And what's super cool about rain in Space Engineers 2 is you can actually see the rainstorm from space. You can see the clouds forming up and then going grey and then start raining. And just seeing that from space is a super cool effect. And it looks super good on the ground as well. Way better than it looked in Space Engineers 1. And then on top of rain, there are sandstorms, which both spawn on the deserts of Verger and also on Chemic. And like the rain, you can see these sandstorms from space. Again, super cool touch. And much like the clouds on Caligo, the sandstorms limit your visibility, but to a much more significant effect. You can barely see anything around you when there's a sandstorm going on. If they had the wind thing they spoke about, I imagine flying through a sandstorm is going to be super cool and very cinematic. I can't wait to see how this all looks in the future. On top of weather, as I mentioned, there are also planetary events, and this currently just takes the form of meteor showers, which weren't my favourite feature in Space Engineers 1, but I have to admit, in Space Engineers 2, they do look very cool. Meteor showers can happen anywhere on any of the planets, although from my testing they appear to spawn more frequently on Palatine than they do on Verger or Chemic. And currently meteors don't do damage to voxels, which is good because I hate that, but they do damage grids. However, they do not target grids explicitly, they just spawn in randomly, and they just hit whatever they come into contact with. Much like how meteors were updated recently in Space Engineers 1 to do pretty much the same thing. And the final change I want to bring up in this section before we move on to encounters, contracts and economy is changes to Delphos, the brown dwarf at the centre of our map. They have added a killing field around Delphos, which means if you get too close, you'll start to take damage and eventually die. And I really like how this looks visually. And if you go here in survival, you'll play a character slowly takes damage over time, and the ship that you travel to Delphos in just explodes. Now, I do think it'd personally be cooler if rather than your ship just exploding, it takes damage over time like the engineer does, as your ship slowly coming apart would be a pretty cinematic effect, especially if it started damaging the outer blocks first, and then those blocks would slowly fall off. It'd give you a chance to escape and also make a pretty cinematic effect as well. I'm still convinced from the lore that we have seen in Space Engineers 2 that we will eventually be able to visit Delphos, whether it is a fake brown dwarf and there is something inside of it, or perhaps we'll have some sort of technology that allows us to survive inside the depths of it. I don't know, but we'll save that kind of discussion for a future Space Engineers 2 lore video, as there's a lot about Delphos that we need to discuss. Like and subscribe if you want to see that. Right, encounters, contracts and economy. To start with, when you get to Velation Station and go over to the contract terminal, you are now introduced with this cutscene here, which gives a bit more lore to Space Engineers 2, and additionally it's probably the most impressive cutscene we've got for Space Engineers 2 so far. Of course you can skip it though if you want to. And then when you open up the contract terminal, you'll see that there is a new contract UI, better indicating how many contracts are in each sector and how many you need to complete in order to unlock the next ones. And additionally, they've changed the rewards of contracts. Previously, they just gave you sector progress and unlock new blocks for you to build, but now they give you space credits, which we'll discuss in a minute, and additionally some items. So you can see this first one gives ice, jetpack fuel, and a medkit, and obviously each different contract rewards different items and various amounts of credits. And if I complete this first contract, you'll see that there is a new reward screen for contracts, breaking down the rewards you get, suggesting which contract you do next, and having a bit more information about the contract on the right hand side. It's also worth noting that there are a couple of new contracts in the Verger sector that focus on showing off the new mechanics added in this update, specifically welders, grinders, the new production system that we'll be discussing later in this video, and also combat. So it might be worth creating a new world and go through the contracts again to see what new stuff's been added. Next to the contract terminal, you will now find the trade terminal, which you can open up, and you can see there are all kinds of trades available. This is where you can trade your credits received from completing contracts, and additionally you can sell items in your inventory in order to gain credits as well. Double clicking anything or dragging it left or right will open up the buy or sell menu, so if I double click this nickel, you can see that I have the option to sell it, and I can configure the amount of nickel I want to sell below. So if I press sell, you see that my balance at the top has gone up, and then say I wanted to buy this iron sight rifle down here, I double click on it, and I can see, oof, that is very expensive. I definitely can't afford that at the moment. But if I were to double click something like iron instead, that's a much more reasonable price, and I could definitely buy some iron with the amount of credits I have. Economy is one of those features that I'm sure will change in the future, probably in quite a major way once NPCs and multiplayer are added, but already the system is much more promising than the Space Engineers 1 system. Cargo ship encounters have been added to Space Engineers 2, which are basic encounters that move rather than just being static ones like the normal random encounters. Obviously more advanced mechanics for cargo ships will probably come later, specifically the ability to trade with them and talk with them, maybe there'll be NPCs on them and stuff like that, but for now they add a bit more life to the star system of Space Engineers 2. And alongside cargo ships, random encounters have also been overhauled. I actually did one of my teaser videos for this update on random encounters, and as I showed in that video, random encounters are static encounters that exist to make the world feel a bit more alive and also give you loot. There's encounters like damaged cargo ships, abandoned bases and stuff like that, and inside these encounters you can see the new loot system, which as you complete more contracts in the sector you're currently in, the level of the loot increases, so at 0% colonization you get the worst level of the loot, and at 100% colonization in the current sector you get the best loot, ranging from really good components to rocket launcher ammo, high-end ores, and most importantly, lore, or data pads as real people call them. There's apparently 17 data pads to collect, and I know that will be my #1 mission once I've completed this video. So if you're interested in Space Engineers 2 lore, don't forget to check out these encounters. Or you could just wait for that annoying like and subscribe man to find them all and tell you what they all are anyway. One of the most requested features of Space Engineers 2 was the ability to rebind keys. Previously you could only do this with an external tool called Space Editor, but now you can do it natively within game. You can search for controls at the top, so say I were to type in sprint, I can then click the left box to rebind the primary key for that control, or I can add an additional binding for the control on the right. And you can also add more complex bindings like Control-Shift-M for example, if you want that sort of thing. The developers have said that this system isn't complete, and there will be more options for binding keys in the future, but I imagine for now this will satisfy most people's needs. One feature that's been added in this update that I'm really excited for is production lines. As you can see in front of me, I have the smelter, assembler, refinery and fabricator, the 4 production blocks of Space Engineers 2, and if we open up the production UI of the fabricator, on the top right I have the option to switch between each of the production machines. So from the fabricator, to the refinery, to the assembler, to the smelter. Now if I click on the first component, the mainframe, you can see that the mainframe requires a motherboard and a hard drive, and the motherboard and hard drive are produced at the assembler. You can see here the motherboard requires electronic parts and gold thread. So if I go to the smelter is able to produce gold thread from gold and electronic parts from silicon. So now in Space Engineers 2, the most advanced components require the lower tiers of components in order to be assembled. So this is a 3-part process going from the smelter to the assembler to the fabricator, hence production lines. And if I select this mainframe and set it to produce, you can see that it has added it to the production queue on the right, and you can see the resources it requires below. However, you can see that there is an asterisk next to the mainframe, and if I hover over it, it says assisted by assembler. So if I go to my assembler, you can see that the assembler has automatically queued up the 2 components that the mainframe needs. And then if I go to my smelter, you can see that the smelter has queued up the components that the assembler needs, creating this production line. If I queue up the rest of the components of the fabricator, you can see that the refinery is also required as part of this process as well, as there is a number of components that only it can create as well. Meaning that in order to craft all the components of Space Engineers 2, you still require all 4 machines, which I actually really like. The developers have said that this production line system isn't complete, as in the future the production will automatically split between different blocks. So I imagine if you have multiple assemblers or multiple refineries or multiple smelters, it will queue up the recipes across all of those blocks in order to craft the components in the fastest amount of time, and also the cost of all the different components will change as they go through development as well. Whilst we're on the topic of UI changes, they've upgraded the GPS system in Space Engineers 2. You now have more options to do stuff like rename markers, change their locations, copy and paste them to clipboard and delete them and stuff like that. The GPS system was technically added in the last update, but you could pretty much just place markers and that was it. Most of the new features that have been added to Space Engineers 2 in this update were in Space Engineers 1's GPS system, but a new feature in Space Engineers 2 is the ability to group markers. You can select multiple markers using Shift and Control. For example, if I select the markers for Population Station and the station in the Chemic sector, and then I can press this group button up here, and you can see that creates a group, and then you can rename the group by clicking its name, so I'll call it Stations for example. And clicking on the group selects all of the markers in it, and you can turn them all off, you can turn them all on. And I imagine in the future when we have options to recolor markers and stuff like that, you'll be able to do that to all of the markers at the same time. And the new groups combined with the map make the GPS system in Space Engineers 2 so much better than its Space Engineers 1 counterparts. Just the ability to visualize where a marker is on the map, and then also group a bunch of markers like all locations and stuff like that, and then turn them all on and off at the same time rather than manually clicking through all of them. Oh, it's so good. The oxygen system has been added to Space Engineers 2. Now your oxygen will drain over time if you're anywhere but Verger, as Verger is the only place with a breathable atmosphere. A pressurization system hasn't been added yet, as I imagine that system is probably going to come alongside water, as water filling up volumes and air filling up volumes are very similar mechanics, but potentially it could come sooner. You can fill up your oxygen by going to a survival kit, a med bay or a cockpit that are attached to an O2H2 generator or an oxygen tank, or alternatively you can find or craft oxygen recharges out of ice, iron and copper, and you can use these to manually fill up your oxygen by going to your inventory, going underneath the player character and pressing F here. It doesn't automatically fill up your oxygen like Space Engineers 1 does, it's currently a manual process. And additionally, unlike Space Engineers 1, the actual bottle is consumed, you can't refill it afterwards. Don't know if this will change, the developers haven't really said anything about it at this time. This isn't all the changes that have come in this update. There are performance improvements, animation changes. There is a separate volume slider for tool sounds, which is amazing. So you can individually turn down the volume of your welder, grinder and drill now. For non-English speakers, the game has been localized into 9 different languages, and so many more things have been added. So don't forget to check out the full changelog in the description below this video. After this, we're expecting a 2.3 update, which will add a bunch more things like this update did. And then after that, we're expecting either water or multiplayer and NPCs to come next, but we'll do a separate video in the future discussing all of that. So if you want to keep up to date with the future of Space Engineers 2, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel to keep up to date. And then finally, the giveaway. Keen has given me 3 keys to Space Engineers 2 to give away to you guys, and during this video I've hidden several SC2 plushies. All you need to do is comment below this video the number of plushies and the word plushie. So for example, if there was 1 plushie, you write the number 1 and then plushie as shown on screen. And I'll select the winners of this giveaway a week after this video has gone up. And for those that don't want to win the giveaway, make sure to spam random numbers of plushies in the comments below. Anyway, giveaway aside, if you want to go the extra mile and support this channel, you can do so by becoming a YouTube member or a patron with the links in the description below.